Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's ITA Clean Sport Education webinar. What you need to know for 2026. As we approach the end of the year, it is important that athletes and athlete support personnel understand what is new in anti-doping in 2026. My name is Armand Urban, member of education team at the International Testing Agency. Before we continue, I would like to make sure that everyone is aware of the simultaneous interpretation options available for you today. On your Zoom menu, you should see a button called Interpretation. From here, you can select the language that feels most comfortable for you. And remember that, interpretation is available in Arabic, French, Russian, and Spanish. Also, a reminder that we are recording this session in all channels. Should you wish to watch this session later on in our YouTube channel. For those who prefer to read along, you can also turn on translated captions. Simply open the captions menu on your Zoom bar and select your preferred language. And please keep in mind that these captions are translations of the original English audio, and in the event of any discrepancies, the meaning and spirit of the original English version will prevail. So, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mark Stuart and David Healy. To start, I would like to first introduce David. David has been the senior manager in WADA Science and Medicine Department since 2018. His background includes extensive experience as a sports pharmacist at different international events, including the Rio 2016 Olympic Games. Welcome, David. It's a real pleasure to have you with us today. And I would say good morning to you in Canada. We truly appreciate you taking the time to join us and share your expertise with everyone here.
Thank you very much, Armando, and welcome to everyone. Hopefully, we can provide you with a very informative presentation this morning or this afternoon for some of you.
Thank you, David. Next, I would like to welcome Dr. Mark Stuart. Dr. Stuart is the Drugs Health and Development Senior Manager at the ITA. Importantly for today's discussion, he's also a sports pharmacist, with extensive expertise and experience in sports pharmacology. And importantly also to know that Dr. Stuart has led pharmacy operations at over 16 sport international events. Welcome to the webinar, and thank you so much for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Armando. Thank you. Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Armando. Today, I'm going to give an overview of the list of prohibited substances and methods, and especially some of the new changes that will come into effect on the 1st of January next year. The Prohibited List is the international standard published by the World Anti-Doping Agency that defines which substances and methods are banned in sport. As an athlete or an athlete support personnel, it's very important that you know where to find it and are familiar with what's on it, so that you know how to check whether the medication you plan to take is prohibited or permitted in the sports that you compete in. The list is a constantly evolving document, and it's updated at least annually, so it's really important that you always check for any updates. WADA publishes the version for the upcoming year in October of each year, which comes into effect on the 1st of January for the subsequent year. Now, occasionally changes are made mid-year, so if you need to take a new decision about whether to take a medicine, always refer to the WADA website for the current list so that you are basing that decision on the current rules. So, how does a substance get onto the list? Well, a new substance or method can be added to the prohibited list if it is deemed to meet two of the following three criteria that you can see on the screen. Firstly, it has the potential to enhance sport performance. For example, that they can make the athlete run faster, swim faster, compete faster, or for longer, or perhaps lift heavier weights, or feel less pain, so the athlete could push themselves a little harder. And the second criteria is that the substance or method represents a health risk to the athlete. Now, many of the drugs on the prohibited list fall into this particular category based on some of the serious side effects that they have or their impact on health. For example, anabolic steroids, they can have serious cardiac side effects, which can result in an increased risk of heart attack. Some of the narcotic drugs, such as heroin or fentanyl, have a serious risk of addiction, and marijuana use has known and very widely documented health risks for users. Now, the last criteria is that the use of the substance or method violates the spirit of sport. Now, spirit of sport really covers many concepts, but in essence, it is the values relating to things like ethics, fair play, honesty, respect for rules, the laws, and respect for your other teammates. Now, I always say and try to explain this that if something is being used with the intention to cheat, then it's probably going to be against the spirit of sport. This is an overview of the sections of the prohibited list. You can see that it consists of substances and methods prohibited at all times. Now, that is every day of an athlete's life, including when they're not competing. It also has a section with substances prohibited only during the in-competition period, which is generally from midnight before your event until the end of the doping control process. Now, I should note that WADA may approve for a particular sport an alternative definition of the in-competition period. Therefore, please always consult your International Federation anti-doping rules to know exactly what that definition that applies to your particular sport. The prohibited list also has a section that describes substances that are only prohibited in certain sports. Now, beta blockers are the particular category of drugs where sport-specific rules apply. Now, if you compete in any of the following sports noted on the slide on your screen, these medications are prohibited for you. It's very important to know that there are many common medications that are on the list and are prohibited in sport. Here's some examples. Now, things like there's some asthma medications on the prohibited list. Insulin, which is used for diabetes, glucocorticoids, which is used for inflammatory conditions and treatment of injury, ADHD medications, diuretics and some antihypertensive drugs, which are used sometimes for blood pressure. But if these are needed for legitimate medical conditions, athletes can apply for an exemption to be able to take them. Now, David is going to follow this presentation. He's going to cover these a little bit later, what these therapeutic use exemptions are and how that works. So, a little tip, always remind your doctor that you are an athlete and subject to anti-doping rules so that they can help you check the status. You could potentially share the current prohibited list with your doctor to be especially careful, so that they also have the most up-to-date information so they can give you the best guidance and advice. Now, without a valid TUE, the athlete will be liable for everything they use and that is found in their body, regardless of whether there was a genuine intention to cheat or not. The rules are very clear. The consequences can be very tough and potentially career-changing, life-changing for an athlete. So athletes really need to take this very seriously. So I know you're going to be pleased to hear that there's a lot of resources out there to help you. And a very good resource I just want to flag is globaldro.com. Now, if you live in Canada, UK, USA, Switzerland, Japan, Australia, or New Zealand, you can search for the brand names of medicines in your countries. But an athlete in any country can look up the status of an ingredient using this website, or find links to other international websites, which are also on the homepage of this globaldro.com website. And that's will give you links to other sites with perhaps information specific to the country where you're living. Now, I would encourage all athletes to check this out if you haven't already. Secondly, ask your doctor or pharmacist. They are experts in medicines and they can help you interpret the WADA prohibited list. Many national anti-doping agencies also have athlete advice lines with experts on hand to help with your questions about medicines in your country. Therefore, actively check with your national anti-doping organization as well. Now, on to the changes to the prohibited list that come into effect in just a few weeks' time on the 1st of January 2026. The WADA prohibited list is reviewed by the team at the World Anti-Doping Agency every year to keep pace with new science and emerging products. Some updates to the list are technical, but others can have direct implication for athletes, especially when it comes to medications or supplements. For 2026, there are several new examples of prohibited substances that have been added to various categories of the list. Now, you should note that these are not all new substances being added to the 2026 list for the very first time, but some are additional examples of substances that many of which are already prohibited and have been prohibited for some time, but now they're actually named specifically on the list. Now let's look at what specifically has changed and perhaps some of the reasons for that. Let's start with the category of substances and methods that are prohibited at all times. That means both in competition and out of competition. Firstly, WADA has clarified the wording in the section relating to anabolic agents. Now, this includes anabolic steroids. They have noted that all esters, which are chemical variations of the steroids already on the prohibited list, are also banned. This new wording makes it absolutely clear that all types of anabolic steroids and substances in that sort of category are prohibited. And this new clarification really makes sure that no athletes are competing with any potential performance-enhancing steroid in their body, really ensuring a level playing field every time. In addition to what's listed in this section of the prohibited list, all other substances with a similar chemical structure or similar biological effect are also prohibited. The next section is the section on peptide hormones and growth factors. Pegmalacetide is a long-acting variation of erythropoietin. Now, it was developed for the medical treatment of anemia, which is where a person does not have enough red blood cells to carry sufficient oxygen through the body. So this medication stimulates red blood cell production, thus increasing the oxygen carrying capacity of the blood. Now, this is exactly the effect that athletes have misused with EPO in the past to improve performance, particularly for endurance sports. So because of its strong performance-enhancing potential, WADA has now added it to the list as prohibited at all times. The next section is beta-2 agonists. Now, some of the substances in this category are legitimate asthma medications that help open airways. Salmeterol is one example listed on the prohibited list, with Seretide and Serevent as just a couple of examples of brand names of these inhalers that are commonly used for the treatment of asthma and COPD. However, at high doses, they may be performance enhancing. And that's why WADA has some restrictions as to the level of doses that can be used by an athlete. Now, WADA has now clarified for 2026 the dosing intervals for salmeterol to ensure that this particular drug is not used for performance enhancement. And so the allowed use of inhaled salmeterol will be modified in 2026. The total permitted daily dose of 200 micrograms over 24 hours has been noted on the prohibited list for some time for this drug, and this aspect remains unchanged. However, athletes will only be able to therapeutically inhale up to 100 micrograms of salmeterol over any 8-hour period, and not to exceed 200 micrograms over a 24-hour period. A therapeutic use exemption will be required to cover therapeutic use that exceeds these permitted limits. Now, David will cover what this means later in this presentation. So this update to the prohibited list I guess, protects legitimate medical use, while it really closes the potential loopholes for misuse of this medication at high doses. Now, if you're an athlete with asthma, please do take the time to review the 2026 list very closely to check the status of your prescribed medications and that it falls within the permitted ranges on the prohibited list. It can be very complex to interpret these doses. So I would really recommend that you ask your doctor or your pharmacist to help you understand this and how this applies to your existing medications. Now, let's look at the S4 category, which is hormone and metabolic modulators. With a new addition, known by a few different names, they're listed on the screen. Phenylbenzochrominone, which is also known as benzoflavone, napthoflavone, or simply napthoflavone, is not an approved medicine, but it can appear in some supplements. Now, mainly those that are claiming to boost testosterone or reduce estrogen. This drug works like an aromatase inhibitor, changing the body's natural hormonal levels and potentially promoting anabolic effects, which may be performance enhancing. For this reason, WADA has now banned it under the S4 category on the prohibited list. Now, the biggest risk for athletes with this one is that it can be found in some supplements. So extra caution with supplements needs to be taken into account, especially with this new product on the list for 2026. Next, we have BAM15. There is another scientific name there on the screen that I'm not even going to try to pronounce. Now, BAM15 is a laboratory research chemical which has never been approved for human use. And so it really does present some serious health risks if taken by humans and athletes who are human, obviously. So this drug acts to increase the body's energy expenditure, essentially mimicking the extreme effects of the extreme exercise effects. It's sold and marketed online as a fat-burning substance, sometimes for weight loss, and sometimes promoted as an endurance enhancer. Now, WADA clearly prohibited BAM15 to prevent unsafe and potentially harmful use by athletes, and also due to its effect on the body that may have the potential to lead to a performance enhancement. Now, this is generally a very dangerous and unregulated substance for anybody to be taking. Now, let's look at those new changes for 2026 that relate to the substances and methods prohibited during the in-competition period. Firstly, stimulants. Stimulants can provide, yeah, well, they can improve focus, they can improve alertness, reaction time, which has the potential to lead to major performance advantages. Full modafinil is a synthetic stimulant related to modafinil, which has been on the prohibited list for some time already. But this new related stimulant it's actually stronger acting. It boosts concentration, it reduces fatigue, which can provide an unfair advantage, particularly in endurance sports and perhaps precision sports. It's unapproved. It's often sold online, again, as supplements. Now, WADA listed this to be more comprehensive in the coverage of the stimulant category of the prohibited list. Fladrafenil is another stimulant drug. And now this is slightly different from flummodafinil, but it's got very similar effects. It increases mental alertness and increases the resistance to tiredness. Again, this is sold online as supplements. Because it's not approved medically and most likely primarily used for performance enhancement, it's prohibited under the S6 stimulant category. One of the most significant changes for the list back in 2022 was the addition of local injections of glucocorticoids as a prohibited route of administration during the in-competition period. Now, the use of glucocorticoids requires special attention by both athletes and healthcare providers in that local injections of glucocorticoids are widely used in sports medicine for athletes, mainly to treat some very common conditions. And we also know that after glucocorticoids are administered, they can still be detected in the urine for some time thereafterwards. So WADA also published back in 2022 some very helpful guidance on the washout periods of glucocorticoids to help physicians consider when they can administer them in relation to the athlete being tested. Now, the washout period refers to the time from the last administered dose to the time of the start of the in-competition period. Now, this is beginning at 11:59 p.m. on the day before a competition in which the athlete is scheduled to participate, unless a different period was approved by WADA for a given sport. This table shows the washout periods for various glucocorticoids and their routes. Now, many are commonly used in the sports medicine setting. And you can see that the washout periods for glucocorticoids varies from 3 days to 60 days, depending on the drug and depending on the route of administration. With such washout periods now better defined, clinicians, doctors have much more information to base decisions on regarding the selection of different types of glucocorticoids for athlete treatment. Now, the most up-to-date washout period guidance is on the WADA website, so please check that out and have that to hand, particularly if you're a sports medicine doctor. Now, for 2026, WADA has provided some further guidance relating to these washout periods. They have clarified that long-acting, and these are sometimes called depot injections, may actually remain detectable beyond the standard washout periods that WADA published back in 2022. An indicator that a medication is long-acting might be that they have the words depot or sustained release in their name. And so, yeah, so this new guidance, this new information really helps to prevent accidental positive tests. I think this also reinforces the importance of planning of medical treatments for athletes, particularly if you're a healthcare professional working with athletes. For athletes, this is certainly a topic to discuss with your doctor if you are prescribed glucocorticoid drugs for your treatment, so that you can plan your treatment accordingly and be prepared if a TUE is needed. All right, now let's look at some of the changes to the prohibited methods section of the list. Prohibited methods apply at all times, that is both in competition and out of competition. Manipulation of the blood and its components is a core doping concern because it can directly improve performance, particularly endurance. Now, WADA now explicitly states that withdrawal of blood or blood components from an athlete is prohibited, except for 2 scenarios. Now, these are, firstly, that it's used for analytical purposes, including medical tests or giving blood during the doping control procedure. And the second exception is for donation purposes when performed in a blood collection center, which is accredited by the relevant regulatory authority, such as a government health agency of the country in which it operates. WADA also notes on the prohibited list that platelet-rich plasma, known as PRP, and other related procedures remains not prohibited. So PRP treatment can still be used for athletes. Again, this is also something to discuss with your doctor if you are an athlete and you wish to donate blood, particularly so that the location that this is performed in complies with these WADA specifications. Another new prohibited method for 2026 is deliberate carbon monoxide inhalation. Now, a very new section, M1.4, has been created on the list, especially for this. Now, you may know that carbon monoxide is present in the air that we breathe, But this new prohibition refers to the administration of carbon monoxide through the use of devices, such as the one in the picture, um, that can administer more concentrated amounts of carbon monoxide to the person. Now, this may have the effect of stimulating red blood cells and the production of red blood cells, which is why this is documented as a prohibited method. In any case, the act of breathing concentrated amounts of carbon monoxide is highly dangerous, and it's actually been associated with death in some situations. Within this new rule, there is an exception. WADA does say that medical diagnostic carbon monoxide tests remain permitted, as it's very occasionally used in specialist procedures such as total hemoglobin mass measurements to assess aerobic capacity or the determination of pulmonary diffusion capacity or lung capacity, in other words. Next, gene and cell doping definitions are expanding to keep pace with biotechnology. And the 2026 update in section M3, gene and cell doping, adds specific mention of cell components, such as mitochondria, that could be transplanted to enhance recovery or sport performance. This new addition really tightens up this category to ensure that athletes cannot exploit potential gaps using genetic modification. Again, this is a very specialist area and probably one that most athletes will never encounter as part of their medical treatment. But again, this is something to discuss with your doctor if your treatment involves normal cells or genetically modified cells. Right. Now, let's move on to the monitoring program. You may have heard about the WADA monitoring program. This is where WADA looks at laboratory results to see how substances are being used by athletes. For 2026, semaglutide and tirzepatide will be monitored for how they're being used by athletes. Now, common examples of these include the brands Ozempic and Mounjaro, but there are a number of other brands of these medications available too. Now, just because they're being monitored, this does not mean that they will be prohibited just yet, and it does not necessarily mean that they will be prohibited in the future. But particularly given the action of these drugs on weight loss, WADA wants to better understand how these drugs are being used in the athlete community to better inform future potential decisions about their use in sport. I just wanted to explain this to you so you understand the difference between when a drug is on the prohibited list versus on the monitoring program. Also for 2026, tramadol and fentanyl will continue to be monitored for how they are being used by athletes in the out of competition period. They're currently only prohibited during the in competition period. Now, these drugs are strong painkillers which are used medically for severe pain. And particularly given the addictive properties of these drugs and the health risks to athletes, through monitoring, WADA wants to better understand how these drugs might be used in the out of competition context to better inform future potential decisions about their use in sport. It's all part of the process of WADA kind of gathering information to feed into the changes of the prohibited list year on year. All right, so just to finish, these are my final recommendations. First of all, know what medicines you're taking. Check that they're not prohibited, especially now, going into 2026 with the new prohibited list. You have just over a month to prepare. Ask your doctor, your pharmacist, your national anti-doping agency if you're not sure. Get them to help you understand the prohibited list. Or use some of the websites like Global Dro that I pointed out earlier. So that's all for me for now. Happy to take questions later. But now I'm absolutely delighted to pass the floor to David Healy from the World Anti-Doping Agency to tell you about therapeutic use exemptions. Thank you, and over to you, David.
Thank you, Mark. As always, that was very informative and well presented. So today I'll take you through the therapeutic use exemption process, or TUE process for short, focusing on what it looks like from the athlete's perspective and sharing some general information and practical advice along the way. For those of you already familiar with the process, much of this will act as a refresher, but I'm happy to take any technical or more detailed questions at the end. So, what is a therapeutic use exemption, or TUE? A TUE allows an athlete with a legitimate medical condition to use a medication or treatment that is otherwise prohibited in sport. It ensures that athletes can receive essential medical care without being unfairly excluded from competition. The purpose of the TUE system is to protect both the athlete's health and the integrity of sport, striking a balance between fair play and the right to treatment. TUEs add value by providing a transparent and consistent process recognized worldwide. They give athletes confidence that their medical needs are respected while maintaining trust among competitors that all athletes are held to the same standards of clean sport. The ultimate goal is to create a level playing field for all athletes worldwide. So, when do you need a TUE? As Mark already mentioned, many common medications contain substances included on the prohibited list. And it's important that anytime you visit your doctor, you remind them that you are an athlete and subject to anti-doping rules. Common examples I see regularly and that many athletes might not immediately associate with anti-doping can include blood pressure medications, pain medications, and even treatments you may have been using for numbers of years, maybe since you were a child. For example, if you were diagnosed with diabetes as a child and you've been using insulin for 15 years. However, now once you step up to a higher level, such as you're transcending from youth level to national or international level, it's essential that you double check any of your medications just in case they're prohibited. And if they are, you may need to apply for a TUE. There are several easy ways to check if your medication is prohibited. First one, you can always go to the WADA website, look at the prohibited list there. There's various drug information tools, such as Mark mentioned earlier on. There's globaldro.com. Or the first point of contact can always be your national anti-doping organization, or simply ask your doctor or pharmacist for guidance. So, where can you get a TUE? Well, TUEs are granted by anti-doping organizations, or ADOs for short. These include international federations, which are the world sport governing bodies. For example, FIFA for soccer, UCI for cycling. Then we have the national anti-doping organizations. This is your country's anti-doping body. For example, in Ireland, it would be Sport Ireland. In the US, USADA. In Russia, RUSADA, etc. And these are the organizations would probably grant the most amount of TUEs per year. As you can see in the graph on the chart, they grant up to 80% of TUEs every year. And finally, then we have major event organizers, or MEOs. These are mass event sport participation event, such as the Olympics, the Paralympics, maybe the Pan Am Games. So thus, all of these organizations should be your first port of call if you have any queries about the process. If you're unsure what level you're at or where do you fit into between these organizations, I recommend that you contact your national anti-doping organization, who will then provide you with guidance. So now that you've identified the need for a TUE and know which organization to apply to, what comes next? Well, the process begins with you, the athlete, working closely with your doctor to collect all the necessary medical information and evidence. Once everything is ready, you submit your TUE application to the appropriate anti-doping organization as discussed in the previous slide. Your application is then reviewed by a group of independent medical experts called a TUE committee. Their role is to confirm that the treatment is medically justified, that it won't give you a performance advantage beyond restoring your normal health, and that there's no reasonable permitted alternatives. TUEs are granted in accordance with the International Standard for Therapeutic Use Exemptions, or the ISTUE. It's basically it's a document which sets out the processes and defines the responsibilities of all stakeholders involved in the process. So this standard, together with the World Anti-Doping Code, has recently undergone a 2-year revision process, and the updated revision will come into force in January 2027. While some refinements have been made to improve clarity and consistency, the fundamental principles of the TUE process remain unchanged. So once all this information is sent into your ADO will then upload it into the WADA Atoms database where it's stored. So how can you make sure that you have the best chance of getting your TUE approved? Well, WADA has developed a series of resources to help both athletes and their physicians throughout the TUE application and evaluation process. One of the most useful of these is the TUE checklist, which explains exactly what information and medical evidence should be included with your application. You can bring the checklist with you when you go to visit your doctor, and then you can make sure that all the right details are provided for at the first time. WADA has also developed TUE physician guidelines, which give doctors clear, condition-specific advice. These cover the most common medical conditions seen in sport and help ensure that all applications are consistent and complete, no matter where in the world they come from. Together, these resources make the process smoother, they reduce delays, and help athletes to have the best possible chance of having their TUE approved. So I really strongly encourage that all athletes go on the WADA website, download the checklist, and bring the relevant copy with you when you go to visit your doctor. So I mentioned these people earlier on the TUE committee. So who actually reviews your TUE once it's submitted? That, as I said, that responsibility lies with this committee called the TUE committee. It is made up of at least 3 independent physicians who have an experience with sports medicine. One of the members will act as the chair, and WADA always suggests that one member should have a specific expertise relevant to your medical condition. For example, if you're applying for an asthma TUE, there should be a pulmonologist, or if it's a ADHD TUE, maybe a psychiatrist should be on the panel. So the TUEC will carefully review all medical information that you and your doctor provide to decide whether your application meets the criteria set out in the international standard for TUEs. Once they have a complete application, they'll always aim to make a decision within 21 days, but usually it should be faster. So if your application is approved, you'll receive a TUE specifying exactly what treatment is authorized, at what dose, what route of administration, and for how long. And as I mentioned earlier, all this information is then stored in the WADA Atoms database. It's important to remember that a TUE is granted for a specific period. It doesn't last indefinitely. In most cases, the duration reflects the length of your treatment, except for certain long-term chronic conditions where longer approval may be appropriate. This approach helps ensure greater harmonization worldwide, reduces the risk of prolonged use of prohibited substances, and helps ease the workload in TUE committees, among other benefits. The TUE physician guidelines provide clear recommendations on how long TUE should be granted for different medical conditions. So, as your TUE approaches its expiry date, or if your treatment changes, you'll need to renew your TUE by submitting a new application with updated medical documentation. Remember, a TUE can also be reviewed or revoked if new evidence comes to light or the approved conditions aren't followed. Okay, so what happens in the scenario if your TUE is denied? Well, if your TUE is denied, your anti-doping organization must provide you with the reasons for that decision, why it was denied. In many cases, a denial happens because not enough medical documentation was submitted. This can often be resolved by going back to your treating doctor, obtaining the required test results or reports, and resubmitting your application. Your ADO can guide you on exactly what information is needed, whether it be the specific diagnostic tests or specialist evaluation. If, however, you still disagree with the decision, you always have the right to challenge it, and this can be done through a review or appeal. The process and timelines for doing this will be clearly outlined in your denial letter. Next, we'll touch on a retroactive TUEs. Well, a retroactive TUE is a type of therapeutic use exemption that an athlete applies for after using a prohibited medication or treatment. Normally, athletes must apply for a TUE before starting treatment, but in some situations, this isn't possible. For example, during a medical emergency, unexpected hospitalization, or due to your sport level, or due to your level or your sport that you compete in, your NADO might not require you to apply in advance. Retroactive TUEs are there to ensure fairness, allowing athletes who genuinely need urgent or unavoidable treatment to be protected, but you must also satisfy the criteria listed in the ISTUE to qualify for one. If you're unsure, always contact your anti-doping organization for more information about when to apply in advance. It's important that the health and safety of the athlete is paramount, and no emergency treatment should be withheld that would result in the athlete's health being compromised. Next, you might have heard of recognition of TUEs. Well, TUE recognition is a process by which a TUE granted by one anti-doping organization, let's say your national anti-doping organization, is accepted and recognized by another, be it your international federation. This occurs when an athlete is transcending from one level to another. Say you're stepping up a level. Recognition ensures that you don't need to apply for a new TUE every time you compete under a different authority. Instead, your existing TUE can be reviewed and, if compliant with the international standard for TUEs, recognized as valid internationally. Recognition helps maintain fairness and consistency across sports and countries so that TUEs granted according to the rules are respected by all relevant organizations. For a lot of cases, once your TUE is entered into ADAMS, you don't need to do anything further. Recognition happens automatically. This means your TUE will be visible and acceptable by other ADOs, allowing everything to run smoothly in the background. However, and this is very important, some international federations still ask athletes to apply separately for recognition. Thus, you always need to check with your international federation or MEO before competing in their event. In those situations, the federation or MEO reviews the TUE, and they may, in some rare cases, decide not to recognize it if they believe it doesn't fully meet the criteria. If this happens, don't worry. Like with a TUE denial, you always have the right to appeal. Your ADO will explain exactly how to do this in the communication you receive. So what is WADA's role in this process? WADA plays a central role in overseeing and harmonizing the TUE process across the global anti-doping world. Specifically, WADA monitors and screens TUEs both administratively and clinically. WADA has the right to review any TUE decision with the authority to uphold or reverse those decisions where warranted. And WADA strives to continuously improve the TUE system via policy updates and education. So just some background information. So almost 4,000 TUEs are registered in ADAMS every year. And that might seem like a lot, but as I mentioned earlier, the majority of those TUEs are recorded by for national level athletes by their national anti-doping organizations. And if you're interested, WADA has published 2 studies reviewing the prevalence of TUEs at both the Olympics and Paralympics. The findings consistently show that overall prevalence remains low, with approximately 1% of athletes at the Olympics and between 3 and 4% of athletes at the Paralympics holding valid TUEs. So let's do a quick roundup of a case just to put everything we've spoke about today into one package. So here we have an 18-year-old skier diagnosed with ADHD when they were 10 years old. They were diagnosed by their GP, but recently at 18 they got reevaluated by a psychologist. They used different O'Connor scale or the Diva scales. Now in this circumstance, the athlete's moving up from youth to national. So what's the next steps? As always, first step, contact your NADO. NADO then download the TU application and the ADHD tech checklist from the WADA website and bring them to your doctor. Together with your doctor, collect all the medical information and submit it to the NADO. So in this circumstance, the athlete did everything. In this scenario, the athlete did everything right, and they were granted a TUE with a duration of 4 years. 3 months later, however, the athlete selected for the national team. Again, what are the next steps that we need to do? Again, the first thing is always, it's the first thing with everything in this is communication. So contact your international federation, inquire about their recognition policy. In this case, say if there's automatic recognition, the athlete has to do nothing else. But what if there isn't automatic recognition? The IF then review the TUE. They can decide whether to recognize or not. So let's hypothesize in this case that the IF TUE committee goes back to the athlete and says, we need a psychiatrist report. So the athlete is informed of this request and scheduled an appointment. However, the earliest date isn't for 1 month. During this period, while he's awaiting the psychiatrist assessment, the athlete's TUE remains valid at national level, but not for international competition. So once the assessment is completed and the necessary documentation is provided, the IF reviews it and subsequently recognizes the TUE. The athlete is then able to compete at international level. So finally, just some key points, and just to reiterate and echo some of the stuff Mark said, and it's something we're always saying, is just be as informed as possible. There's a lot of resources out there, both on the WADA website, and sure you can find plenty on the ITA website as well. Even the first stop is pick up the phone, contact your national anti-doping organizations. They're the ones in your country. They're the experts that you should really touch base with first. Be diligent. Remember, it's your responsibility as an athlete to take control of the medications and understand what you're taking. And again, don't hesitate to reach out for guidance. Finally, then my last slide is just to highlight some of the educational resources available for athletes on the WADA website. And I hope this has been beneficial for you. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, David and Mark, for those excellent presentation. That was really clear and insight overview from the key updates of the 2026 Prohibited List to also the important reminders about therapeutic use exemptions and how actually they apply. I would say this is really great information that every athlete and every member of any support team should know. And well, importantly, as we mentioned at the very beginning of today's session, it's essential that both athletes and athlete support personnel understand what is new in anti-doping for 2026. For those who probably join a little bit later, a kind reminder that the recording of the session will be available on our YouTube channel. Should you wish to watch it again, take some notes or probably share it with your peers. And of course, you're always welcome to send us additional questions later on if something comes to mind. We have now reached the part of today's session where we get to actually hear directly from you and answer your questions live. So once again, a big thank you to everyone who already submitted a question. I can see many of you are actually actively sending questions in the Q&A box, which is fantastic. If you haven't done so yet, please, this is the perfect moment to send your questions through the Q&A box, and we will do our best to cover as many as possible. So to help us with this part of the webinar, again, I'm very pleased to welcome back our two experts, Dr. Mark Stuart and David Healy. Mark, David, welcome back. As you can see, we have plenty of questions waiting for us. So let's go through the ones that we can tackle one by one, and well, as many as we can. So let's start with this one, which I think it's super relevant, especially for, well, all the athletes who might actually be new to anti-doping. And the question comes from Leo Sanchez. And the question is there one or more prohibited list for sports? Mark, what do you think about this question?
There's one prohibited list that's published by WADA that applies to all sports organizations that are signatory to the World Anti-Doping Code. Essentially, this is the main one for most international federations. There are some sports that do have some specific substances that are prohibited in their sport, and that's based on the rules of their particular sport and their federation. There's not many of them, but they do exist. So again, be familiar with the wider prohibited list, but also please check with your international federation to see if there's any other restrictions, on substances that might be prohibited by your federation in the sports that you compete in. David, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
No, I think you kind of covered it. I think you covered it, Mark. Yeah, I think it's pretty good, your answer.
Perfect. Thank you both. Real clear explanation, I would say. Let's move to the next one. Here's another great question from the Q&A box. And again, thank you so much for sending your questions. The question is, how can my athletes receive notifications if a new medication becomes prohibited or probably permitted? Mark, I will go first to you. What do you think about this question?
Sure. Well, firstly, athletes are not going to get a magic email saying that your medication is prohibited. This really is up to the athlete to be proactive, to go in and check the latest prohibited list, and check all of your medications, everything that you're taking against that list to make sure they're not prohibited. Nobody's going to come and tap you on the shoulder and say, give you that information. You need to be proactive and read that. So the World Anti-Doping Agency obviously does put everything on their website. Same with the Global DRO website. Any new drugs, medications that WADA might prohibit also goes into that platform. That's also kept up to date. You need to be proactive with this. You need to check, especially now at the end of the year. You've got just over a month. You should be going in and checking everything you're taking now. Nobody's necessarily going to knock you on the shoulder and give you that information.
And just to add to that as well, you know that every year the prohibited list will be updated. Every year there will be amendments, there will be little changes. So set a reminder for yourself this time every year to look. Oh, I must go look at the prohibited list. Or you're already taking the right steps now by joining these webinars and informing yourself. So it's just to get that consistency, and I need to check every year. I need to keep myself updated. Subscribe to these maybe websites as well that you can get notifications from.
All right, thanks, both. Let's move on to the next question. We actually touched a little bit, I would say, this briefly during the webinar, but I think it's actually worth revisiting this. What should an athlete do if they need to use a prohibited substance for medical reasons? David, I will come straight to you for this one.
Yeah, well, if they need to use a prohibited substance, the first thing, again, because there's sometimes you might need a TUE, because there's a nuance to it depending on when you use that substance. It could be in competition or out of competition, depending on the type of substance. So first thing you need to do if you're using a prohibited substance is I would contact your anti-doping organization to see if you need to apply for a TUE. If you need to apply for a TUE, as described in the presentation, speak with your doctor, go through all the steps, collect all the medical information. The more information that you provide to your anti-doping organization about your medical condition and why it's necessary to use that medication, the easier the process will be. It's one of the biggest hurdles that we see is sometimes just stating that you need the medication or having a prescription it isn't sufficient. There has to be, you have to provide evidence to that TUEC, the TUE committee. They need to be able to make the same diagnosis that your physician initially made to prescribe you the medication. So communicate with your ADO, communicate with your doctor, and prepare your medical file.
Thanks, David. This next question, I would say, connects perfectly to the one that we just discussed. The question is, what are some of the common examples of medications that require a TB?
Yeah, I can take this one again. This is very, very common. At the moment, I can give you an example. The most common medications that we see for TUEs, there would be glucocorticoids, because of their glucocorticoids and stimulants would be the two most common categories of substance. Glucocorticoids because of their anti-inflammatory properties. They're used in sport for lots of musculoskeletal issues. But they can also be used for conditions such as Crohn's, etc. Stimulants are something that we are seeing that it's growing more often in sport because of the more prevalence of ADHD, both in society and in sport. So these would be two most common categories. But as I said, you have to be careful. We have diuretics, and people with blood pressure will often be on diuretics, and it's one of the ones because diuretics will sometimes come in combination with an other non-prohibited substance. People will often overlook it, and they won't associate it with doping. So there's some common ones we see.
Thanks, David. I got a also good question. Actually, this one is coming from the chat, and I think a lot of people also ask this. What is the monitoring program? Mark, looking at you, and well, David, also feel free to add something about the monitoring program.
So, so the monitoring program is one tool that WADA uses to gather information about the use of particular medications or substances in the athlete population. Just because something's on the monitoring program doesn't mean it's prohibited. It's actually not prohibited. It just means that WADA is gathering information, and that information is reviewed every year. And it's one piece of information that WADA uses to make decisions about what drugs are prohibited in sport. It's not only the monitoring program, but that, looking at research that's being done, looking at new drugs that come onto the market, all those sort of things are taken into consideration every year, to come up with the next list. So it's just one tool, I think, that's it's an information gathering process for WADA.
Perfect. I believe we have time for one more question. This one came from Bill Scott, and the question is, for athletes from countries that do not have a functional national anti-doping organizations, how should they apply for a TUE?
Okay. In this situation, their countries there should be regional anti-doping organizations, and they are like they are within a region, say in the Caribbean region, there will be the regional anti-doping organization, so you can reach out to them. If not, contact your national federation for the sport, who should be able to guide you as well. If still you're having trouble finding where to apply, send us in WADA an email. We'll help guide you as to where they need to go.
Thank you, David. Well, before we wrap up, I want to thank all of you, our attendees, for being here with us today. Your time, your attention, and above all, your commitment to clean sport. A big thank you to all, again, the athletes, coaches, managers, and the wider sport community for joining us today. And of course, special thanks to David and Mark for sharing their expertise. We're pleased to provide you with some resources for each of the topics that we have covered today. You will see now on your screen some links that we have gathered for you and that we recommend. A reminder that you will receive the slides later on. And please also, mark your calendars, as we already have a date for our next monthly ITA webinar, which will focus on Milano Cortina 2026 anti-doping program. So, this wraps up today's webinar. Again, if we didn't get to your question today, or if something comes up later, you can always send us your questions at education@ita.sport. Also, a reminder that you will be redirected to a short survey. It only takes a few minutes, and we really appreciate your feedback. That's our wrap for today. On behalf of the ITA education team, let me close again with a big thank you. We look forward to seeing you next month. Until then, well, good luck, stay strong, and thank you once again for joining us today. It's a good afternoon from us in Switzerland, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.